Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Atomic Mass Transmissions Live. I'm Director of Product Development, Will Schick. I'll get that right someday without a pause to recall what I do here. But today, it's pretty exciting. We have a very special surprise stream content coming for you. We just approved the final plastic frames for the Bad Batch coming to Star Wars Legion next year. And we thought, what the heck, it's stream day. We're excited about these. We know that the community is very hyped to see these things. And they didn't get a lot of mentions at Mini-Strav because we didn't really have anything to show at the time. So why not show some stuff here and kind of like keep the ball rolling forward as we move closer to the Bad Batch coming into Legion next year. So with that, we're just going to be doing some assembly. I'm going to be building these basically like we do every time we get frames in. So the process of production, this is a regular part of the thing where we get to all sit around and build the miniatures, make sure they go together, make notes, send those notes back to the factories, get corrections and revisions, and we go back and forth on that until finally the assembly goes like a dream, and we're very happy with what we've got, and we approve them. So let's go ahead and dive right in and start building some stuff. You can see they're even in their official proofing bag, so boom, let's get them out of there. So this is going to be the final frame for what you're going to see when the Bad Batch comes out next year. These things, so the tool is all done, but they still have to go into full production, and there's all the print materials and everything. And to kind of give you a bit of a refresher, or maybe it's the first time that you've been around where we've talked about the production process, plastic happens well before anything else. So the sculpting, the engineering, and then of course the tooling and then the production of it. It all has to start well before a lot of the things that also happen, like print production and print materials, packaging, miniatures sometimes being painted. Depends on where we are with that. But so we often have plastic well before we have anything else, and that's kind of where we are in the process of these fine clone folks. I guess they're not all boys. We do have an Omega up here in the corner. But this is going to be the overall layout, and this is all determined by stuff. So let's go ahead and just start assembling. And one of the exciting things about getting to do this is you're always assembling before instructions. So people often ask, why not have assembly instructions in the box? Part of the reason for that is because it's very difficult to make correct or accurate assembly instructions if you haven't actually gotten the chance to see how the real assembly goes. So with that all said, here comes the Summer to put this back in focus. Summer's going to be my camera person today because we're going to have a lot of movement and stuff going on. So one of the big things that moving the instructions out of the box allowed us to do is to make sure that those assembly instructions are completely up to date and we don't wind up with something in the packaging that may have a little bit of a incorrect or inaccurate set of steps. So a lot of the times, the engineers who break down the miniatures and do a lot of the work with that, they'll say, okay, well, it makes sense that, you assemble the torso and then you stick the legs on and then maybe you do the arms. And the reality is that, that might make sense when you're looking at the parts, but once you get them in hand, it makes more sense to maybe put the left arm on before the right arm, or maybe you have to do a cape assembly and the cape has to go on before the head. There's a lot of different things that can catch people out with that stuff. So by making sure that we're only creating those assembly instructions after we have final frames all done and ready to go, and we've done all the assembly, then we can make sure that they're as accurate as possible. And it stops that confusion with the instructions in the box aren't quite right, so go to the website and do that. We're not really repeating the work twice. So this is also a really informative process for us because it involves our ability to be able to determine how those assembly instructions should go, which part should go when, and so a lot of note-taking happens during this phase as well. That's going to be this leg. Boop. That's this leg. Whoopsie, got my legs mixed up. That's all right. But when you're doing this for the first time or the second time, as is the case here, you kind of just go based on how you think the miniature will go together the best. And usually when you do that, you wind up more often than not getting it right. But there can be moments with more complex assemblies, especially when you're doing vehicles and bigger kind of miniatures with lots of different parts where the process can be fairly slow and you have to kind of like figure it out as it goes. So we are not talking about anything concerning game stuff because that is a ways off still. So what I can say is that they are a unit for Galactic Republic forces, and they will also be a mercenary option that can be taken in Rebel stuff. And how they function and all of that stuff we're going to save for much closer to the release. So again, we're doing kind of a very special and unique preview style stream where we just thought it would be fun getting closer to the end of the year and all of that, rather than maybe show off or paint or hobby on something that we already did earlier. We take the opportunity because of the timing of the stuff and just put it on the stream. Like I said, we didn't unfortunately have anything really to show off during Mini-Strav for these characters, just due to the timing. You know, we had showed the painted miniatures. We kind of hauled took us to be able to show them off and do a cool spoiler or preview at Adepticon earlier in the year for the little keynote, which kind of meant that when we got to the Mini-Strav moment, we didn't really have anything for the Bad Batch because we hadn't gotten the frames in, they weren't finalized, all of that stuff. So they kind of missed out on their opportunity to be at Mini-Strav, and this was just a time where we're like, well, let's catch up because we got them today and let's do that. But no kind of rules, spoilers, or any kind of like card reveals or anything like that. That's going to be a while. Plastic glue, anything that's like a solvent cement. So Tamiya, I'm using Plastruct plastic weld because it's what Tony had on his desk. But you need that, ideally you need that plastic glue that doesn't just create a typical glue bond, but that actually denatures the hard plastic, the polystyrene, and fuses it together. And that's going to make sure that, you know, your overall final miniature is going to be really, really solid. It's going to be able to survive any kind of dropsies that might happen or anything like that. Let's see, I need the other F part. Let's find the other F part here. Here we go. Right here, hiding out here. One of the really cool things that this frame has a lot of, so we've talked before about how, you know, Generalized, and Dallas covers this a lot, about how steel tools are made and that how undercuts work and everything like that. So that can lead to things like all of your kind of sides where the tool comes together, right? It presses down like this. Those areas can't have a lot of detail because they can't have undercuts and things like that. One of the ways that you can address that, though, is by doing what's called a slide. And so a slide, when you see these little like loopies right here, you'd be like, what's that about on the frame? That's actually a slide. So it allows for more detail to go in. It allows for these helmets, which have details on the sides, to actually have those details and be undercuts and yet come out of the frame equally. So this is actually an extra part. So it's more complex to tool and engineer, but it leads to the fact that you can have these really nice, highly detailed parts and not have to break them up into multiple pieces. So you see that each of the Bad Batch helmets has their own slide that goes along with it, and then also it looks like these little binocs for tech here have a slide as well. So this is one of the ways that we're able to kind of work with certain things to make sure that the assembly process is smooth, that we're getting the high quality details that we want out of everything, but also that we are minimizing our parts where we can. Now you can't do this for everything, so a lot of the times this comes from the factory themselves. They'll make suggestions about where these slides can go, and we'll determine whether or not, you know, that's going to work for the overall layout between them and everything else. This is just the Bad Batch sprue, so, or frame actually. Sprue's different once you get into like the technical jargon. We, as gamers, and I know I did it a lot too, before I really started getting into like the industry and stuff, we call them sprues, but the sprue is actually this little part here. So it's little injection points, but the frame is the whole thing. So From a production standpoint, this is a frame, and it has sprues on it, but the frame itself is where all of the miniatures sit. Not like that's really important for you to remember or even to know, but it's an interesting little tidbit that I didn't know before and I've learned now. So there you go. Okay, let's get this little technical readout thing here on the frame and getting going. Generic something? I missed the generic question, but there are going to be 2 units coming out next year that we've announced for Republic, which is the standard clone commandos, so the Galactic Republic clone commandos. That will include Delta Squad, as we discussed during Mini-Strav, during our roadmap reveals. And I think Dallas even did some paint on those plastics. And then, of course, we have the Bad Batch, which is an entirely different kit and an entirely different unit. So did I put that on right? I did. Okay, perfect. So let's go there. And like, if I was gonna be worried about, hobbying on these folks or painting them, I'd probably spend more time doing some cleaning. But honestly, when we're doing assembly like this, especially when we're just checking for fits and stuff, we actually do our best not to spend a lot of time futzing with them, because we want to see from a perspective of minimal amount of effort invested, do they go together well? Like, is the assembly process smooth and, easy to do? And I don't have to spend a lot of time like trimming, shaving down different plugs or like keys. If I'm just blitzing through it as fast as possible, what does that wind up feeling like? And does that assembly work? And does everything kind of slot together well? So we don't typically waste a lot of time being precious about it. Whereas with normal personal hobby projects, everybody has their own kind of feeling on that, of what the level of cleaning and, mold line taking off and everything is. All right, so there we've got our tech. I'm going to grab one of my bases. And just really quick, use a little bit of our thin super glue here. Really try not to make a mess. I feel like that's totally blocked. Tony, you got to keep your nozzles clear, man. All right, worry about that later. I'll put this to the side though, so I don't have anything to do it. So we might not get them glued to bases, but we'll put them on bases. Okay, tech is done. Let's move on to the next one. We'll go. We'll go with, looks like Echo next. Appropriately numbered with E's, so kudos there. I don't think that was on purpose, but if it was, kudos engineer. What's the general average time it takes from when you start designing a unit until you get a first frame like this? It depends on a couple of different factors. Is it a single character? Is it a full unit? How complex is everything on the frame? The more optional build parts, or the more characters, or generalized miniatures and stuff, obviously the longer it'll take. For something like a unit like this with the Bad Batch, it was a bit longer, just because every single individual in the unit is unique. They're all characters in and of themselves, so that added time to the overall stuff. For a normal unit though, or most things, you're looking at around 24-ish months total. So from concept to like product on the shelf, it's about 2 years. And then just to get the plastics done, we're usually looking at about anywhere from 9 to 13 months. So it takes a long time, and that includes the kind of the original design discussions, determining that we want to release X, Y, or Z unit or character or whatever it is. and then go from that to concepting, and concepting the look of the unit, determining poses, going back and forth on how the posing will look, what the characters are doing. If it's a unit like the Bad Batch, how do they look together? What's our goal for making them feel correct to what we expect the game rules to be and all of that? Because obviously, this process for the miniature starts well before we have any kind of like rules design, but we always want to make sure that we're thinking about, what role do they fill in the army? What are they doing? Is it a fast unit? Is it a melee unit? Is it a ranged unit? Does it like to hunker down and take cover? Is it more of a generalized infantry unit? What does the character do? How do we expect the character to play? Is it a generally unit? Does it command troops? Does it actually get engaged in the action? Is it a force user? All that stuff. And then from there, it has to get assigned to a sculptor. Sculptors all have their own schedules. We have certain folks that we like to schedule out for different things. Each sculptor, kind of like all artists, have their own specific set of skills, and certain folks will excel at doing like unit-based stuff. Some sculptors will really excel at character-based stuff, but they won't be as great as on generalized units, and so that's all handled by Marco and Evan and our sculpting team. And then when the sculpts come in, the engineers actually have to do a lot of work to prep the final sculpts for production, and they do a lot of like fix work and other stuff. So, we'll adjust the pose because we determine that once you see a miniature in 3 dimensions, because the sculptors are all doing this through CAD programs or digital programs, the final look of a miniature really can only be determined once you see it printed in all 3 dimensions. Because much like a photo, we've talked about how photos of miniatures kind of lie, the screen can't show you 3 dimensions. It can fake 3 dimensions, but it does that by effectively cheating certain viewpoints or certain like dimensions and shapes so that your eye sees it in 3 dimensions, but it's not actually in 3D. So the only way to see or to know what a miniature looks like in all of its glory is to actually print it out. And so we print those out on prototype printers. From there, we take a look at them in what we call CAM. We make adjustments, we make notes, we say, oh, this is out of scale to where it should be. This pose isn't working the way we want. It has a bad look here, here, here. And so then our engineers have to go in and they have to adjust for all that. We also look for production problems like undercuts, or, this piece as it's sculpted now is going to be like 5 parts. That's obviously not okay. How do we adjust that or fix it? So there's a huge amount of effort that goes into it even after it's sculpted. And of course the sculpting itself, managed by our sculpting director, manager Mike Jones, and Marco, who oversees the whole sculpting department, and Dallas Kemp as well, as the creative director. They're going through all these revisions as well and everything. So there's just a whole lot of steps that go into it. And of course that all leads to those longer times, that 9-month, 13-month like kind of cycle. And then some of that time does account for the fact that once it's all engineered and we think it's happy, those files go to the factory. The factory then has to look at them. They provide feedback based on things that we may or may not have caught based on tooling, or they might suggest different frame layouts, which may require different revision to the parts. So it's a Herculean amount of effort just to get, a little unit of 6 miniatures out. And at every step, we're also under kind of that focus of, we have to make sure that these things look like the characters, that they are approvable by our great partners at LFL and all of that. So, sometimes it's like the best way to do something is a way you can't do it, because if you did it that way, it wouldn't look like the character, it wouldn't represent the IP. And so in those instances, we have to make a call like, how are we going to address that? Are we going to address that? Are we going to accept something that's maybe 2 parts instead of 1? Because in order to make it look correct and accurate to the reference, it has to be 2 parts. So yeah, it's a really fascinating and fun process, but it's a long process. And it does lead to, a lot of the times we talk about on stream and stuff, or during Ministrav, how we go through these moments where you see something or you get really excited about something, and then you forget about it because it takes such a long amount of time before you actually see it in reality again, that it becomes brand new to you. So it's kind of fun that way as well. I think I trimmed that properly, but we'll find out if I got it right or not. Oh, and see, this is one of those moments where if I was going to write notes for the assembly, I'd be like, put the head on first, then put the bow on, because the bow kind of gets in your way to properly attach the head. And honestly, I would have, like, without having my hands on the miniature, I totally would have just been like, put the bow on, then put the head on, no problem. But there's a note. And so again, this is why having this hands-on experience with this stuff leads us to make better overall stuff. What point does Lucasfilm get involved for approval? Multiple steps. So we're in contact with our partners pretty much weekly, because we're always working on stuff, for one. But two, you have we think we want to make these characters, we want to make this unit, right? So there's the initial concepting phase of just, these are the things we want to do, we think would be cool to do. Sometimes that discussion is, LFL says, hey, these cool things are coming. We think it would be really neat if you looked at this, or if you did that. Or maybe this is something that would fit well into X, Y, or Z game. So they do bring things up to us, but for the most part, we bring kind of our release desires to them, and we say we would like to cover these characters, this unit, these things, this ship, whatever it is. And from that point, we either have a discussion about it and how it will fit into the game and how we're going to be able to represent it in the game according to how it's portrayed on screen. And a lot of that comes back to, we've talked, or not this previous mini extravaganza, but the one last year, where we were talking about Ewoks and things like that. Or when we were talking about the Shadow Collective even before that. One of the big things is that, the games have a lot of player choice. For example, you can have your Ewoks running around with a bunch of fleet troopers and Jedi Knight Luke Skywalker, or maybe you want them with Pathfinders and Jyn and Cassian, because in your kind of headcanon or your what if, the Ewoks helped out at the Battle of Scarif. Maybe that's just a thing that you want to explore, or that's kind of the idea in your head. What if Jyn and Cassian had been on Endor instead? Those things are all well and dandy for you as a player to do, and they're part and parcel of like what makes the games cool, is that player choice. But it's really important that, canonically speaking, the game also represents and reflects accurately the canon of the Star Wars galaxy. So this is where we talked about how mercenaries and the mercenary rules really open up a lot of potential that doesn't make sense otherwise in the setting. So Ewoks weren't part of the Rebel army. They just happened to ally with the Rebels. So by making Ewoks mercenaries that can work with the Rebels, and then also utilizing things like battle forces or other alternate army construction rules and things like that, we can kind of have our cake and eat it too, where you can make the canonical references, you can have that player choice, but it's controlled within this whole kind of general conceit of, we're willing to play in the sandbox, but we're not going to go outside the sandbox. Like, it will still feel like Star Wars. It will still feel like the galaxy far, far away. So those conversations happen. They, of course, look at the concepting and the posing. We say these are the references we want to use. In many cases, like the Bad Batch, there's really only one reference to use. It's just from the show. So easy peasy. But other times you might be like, well, we want to use this reference from the Clone Wars rather than this reference from Revenge of the Sith. We'll talk about whether or not that works in the generalized context. LFL will give us feedback if there's any. We'll talk about the posing. So does the pose make sense for the character? Are we all comfortable with like what it shows? They'll look at all the art as it goes through process. They'll look at the finalized sculpts. So once we're done with the sculpts and we've engineered them and everything, we have the finalized look. They'll look at those. So it's every stage of the process before a physical or final thing gets created or stamped as approved. LFL or our partners will have an approval step for it, and that gives us the most flexibility to be able to go in and address those things before we've gone too far down the road, right? So, you know, rather than sculpting a character that's doing a backflip and then having LFL be like, oh, we don't like the backflip. And then saying, well, we sculpted this with a backflip, now I have to do a completely new sculpt. We avoid those problems at the front end because we know in the concepting phase before anything's sculpted, no backflip. Or maybe yes backflip, you never know. But those are the kind of things that are really important for us to take care of up front, and the approval process and the dialogue that we get to have means that very rarely do we get to the end of the process and we're surprised by the fact that, you know, something we did doesn't meet the final approval of our partners. So they are heavily involved, and we get to have a lot of good dialogues and conversations, and sometimes we debate things. And as with everything that we talk about, right, that discussion and debate always leads to a better kind of end look and result than what we would have gotten had we just kind of done whatever we wanted at the time. CC, okay. So, again, kudos. C is crosshair. E was echo. I'm starting to believe that this was intentional, so good job, engineers. So clever. I know that all of the streams wind up on YouTube eventually, so if you got to head out or can't sit for the whole assembly process, never fear. You can always catch it up on later. Yes, let's get some more of these characters together, and I will absolutely show Wrecker's size compared to the other members. It's going to be a little hard right now just because Wrecker is kind of the only one who's standing straight up, but Crosshair and Hunter are a bit more. Crosshair is very upright. Of course, Crosshair is taller than the rest of the members by canonical height, which is one of those things that you learn. He's a bit slenderer and taller than your normal clone. Wrecker, of course, is just a big chunky boy. But we'll have a Crosshair who's pretty standing upright that we can compare next to the Wrecker. We'll get them all in a little family shot at the end. Okay, how do I want to do this? I'm going to... See, now I'm going to think about this for a second. So I'm going to do a little dry fit really quick. That needs to go... That goes here. Yes? No. This goes here. See, and this is the fun part. When you don't have instructions, you got to just kind of figure it out. And then that. Okay, so he's holding the gun. I got it. So first we're going to glue the fire shot. I think hot shot? No, fire shot? I think it's a fire shot. The blaster, the sniper rifle that he uses has a very specific name that I should know, but I've forgotten it. All right. Glue in there. And I think somebody asked about zip kicker with super glue. Absolutely works very well. I don't love having to do a two-step process with the glue, and I don't think that super glue bonds. You know, it doesn't do the fuse bond that plastic glue does, but 100% we use both interchangeably in the office a lot of the times. And you need super glue in general just to get them on the bases, because obviously the base material is not the same kind of material as the polystyrene on the frame. So it won't actually fuse with plastic, with, you know, your standard plastic glue. So you have to use a more conventional type bond for that stuff, which is why I brought the super glue, but the nozzle on the super glue is clogged. So, you know, best laid plans. How do we want his head to be? He's got a ball joint, so we can turn his head any way we want. Let's go this way. I like this. That's kind of nice. Okay. Nope, got to put on his backpack. Ooh, Zap-A-Gap will work as a filler, huh? Well, I don't think I was aware of that, or I've never tried it at least. Sprue Goo, which is plastic glue mixed with plastic frame, or just using one of the various like gap fillers that they make for polystyrene miniature kits is typically my go-to. Also, if you have like thin plastic cement, you can usually do quite a bit of gap filling with just that. So there's a couple different ways to approach it, but that's interesting. Estimated release. These will be mid next year, approximately. So I guess that would say Q3 based on your question. But of course, a lot of things can change between then just because something is projected. You know, there's still plenty of wild logistics, and you know, just this year we've had so many different kind of shipping and logistics strikes between the dock worker stuff that happened in Canada. We had the UPS potential strike in the States, and of course that affects a lot of places as well. So you just never know anymore, right? I mean, you never did before, but I feel like at least pre-pandemic, we took logistics and shipping and all of this stuff kind of for granted. And the reality of the situation is that, you know, it's really not something that you can completely bank on. So I know marketing's giving me raised eyebrows because I'm even saying expected dates, but that's kind of where we're sitting right now. All right, so do that. We'll do that. Yeah, super. I mean, there's definitely the trade-off for the fuse of plastic glue is the fact that if you're not careful, you might stick a thumbprint in there. So, you know, everything's got its own like kind of foibles. It's pros and it's cons, if you will. So whichever material you feel comfortable with and enjoy working with, that's the one you should use. Like I said, for me, the plastic solvent glues, like the one I'm using here, are always my go-tos. I just feel like I get the best results out of them, and I get the most strength and durability, obviously. But they certainly have their drawbacks as well. Did I glue you on wrong? I bet I did. There we go. That makes more sense. This was one of those things that was really fun, is getting the little gap in between his backpack where he stores his sniper blaster. But making sure that was there. It's one of those little details that you catch as you stare at those references for hours on end, looking at a miniature and being like, wait, his backpack needs to have a little spot for him to store his sniper rifle when he's not using it. And then you figure out how to add that stuff in if you can. That's the wrong arm. That would make sense as to why that doesn't fit. That, great. There are currently no plans for any kind of points errata or anything like that before Worlds. Similar to last year, we typically don't like to make changes this close to the end of a season. That doesn't mean that there won't be anything, but as far as I'm aware, there's nothing currently on the schedule. All right, there's our hunter. So let's see. So there's a wrecker next to a hunter. Let's see how Summer can try to get me in a way that... So there's 3 of them next to each other. So wrecker is definitely much wider and is tall compared to everyone, but of course Crosshairs is a bit taller than Wrecker is based on canonical heights. And then you have Echo, who's more of like a traditional clone size. And so one of the things that also is unique about this unit specifically is that with Legion, Legion has, we talk about the overall like aesthetics. So Legion is supposed to be more of the like live action film style and scope, which means that whenever we do a character like, say, if you go look at Ahsoka Tano, the Rebels Ahsoka Tano, you look at the artwork and everything else, it is stylized in a way that is not based on the animated show. So, yes, Wrecker might feel a little less hulkish based on his appearance in the show, but all of the proportions of these characters have been kind of adjusted to fit within the Legion look, which is if, you know, Tamura Morrison was cast to do a Bad Batch TV show or a movie, how would that affect everything? How would that change a little bit of the look and the stylization? And you're going to see that in the art too, just like you saw with the Ahsoka Tano, which was drawn directly from Rebels, right? That character is from the animated Rebels show. However, if you look at, you know, the facial features and everything else, it's far more real world in its influence, and there's a little bit of the Rosario Dawson likeness, not a lot, but there's some influences there in that stuff, and it's all designed to make those characters fit within the realistic nature of Legion, which means that you get more realistic proportions. For example, if Wrecker looked like he did in the animated show, he'd look really off. He wouldn't look like he fit within the overall aesthetic. He would look like a cartoon character. And, you know, we don't want that. We want to maintain kind of a stylistic and cohesive look. And we talked about this, and Omega is kind of similar, right? So Omega was an interesting one to figure out because obviously, you know, you want to make the little kid, but you want to make sure that it feels like a real version of Omega, a realistic humanoid anatomy and version of it that fits within the Legion aesthetic. And what's going to be really fun is when folks get to kind of compare the two, how this style really plays through with the Shatterpoint version. So we showed off some artwork that said that Shatterpoint is also going to be seeing the Bad Batch coming post the Legion stuff. But when you compare Legion to Shatterpoint, which already you can see between like the Anakins or the Obi-Wans, Shatterpoint leans into that overall like stylized, over-the-top animated aesthetic. So those ones are going to feel a lot more, I think, correct if you're just comparing them one-to-one to the animated versions, because Shatterpoint uses that aesthetic, those over-the-top, like not natural anatomy, looks very cartoony, looks very animated, whereas Legion, you want that real-world groundedness. You want these people to feel like the characters themselves, but also that they would fit within a live-action version of themselves. And so, yes, you will see some differences in terms of just the overall proportions and stylization, and especially when it comes to the art. Preston did some really cool stuff, and we worked very closely with LFL to imagine these characters, the Bad Batch, as if they were from live action, even though we've never seen them that way, which meant using a lot of Tamura Morrison like cues and beats in their faces. So they don't really look like the animated characters. They look like a real live action interpretation of those characters. And that was very fun and a very cool opportunity that I was really thrilled that LFL gave us the opportunity to do, because, you know, sometimes they're cool with going a bit into interpretation. Sometimes, you know, they don't want to like paint themselves into a box, which I totally understand about what a character may or may not look like when it comes to different media. So in this case, we were just able to do that. But here we go. So we have 20 minutes left, but we're really done with these folks, and I don't have anything else going on. So I think today is going to be a short and sweet one, but hopefully the quality of the content has more than made up for our slight lack of quantity today. Overall, really excited for folks to get their hands on this. I know I'm very excited to get my own set of these so that I can paint them up and get them into some Republic squads and everything else. I'm going to have to make a really hard choice when it comes down to whether I want to do the more colorful versions from the later season or the more Republic-oriented classic colors that we see on both the studio painted minis that we showed off at Adepticon and, of course, in the season 7 of the Clone Wars and kind of the first season of the thing. No, you haven't seen the box yet. No box, no cards, no nothing like that. Those things are all coming later. The painted studio minis were shown off during the roadmap panel at Adepticon, though. So if you want to see them all painted up and ready to go, I believe you can go back and check that cast, which is on our YouTube. And you can see them with paint on them. Those, of course, are not final plastics. All of our studio paints are done on prototypes because we have to do that early. So this is the very first time anyone has seen the real plastics outside of our office. And of course, these were just recently approved themselves, which allows us to be able to show them all to you and give you a little sneak preview at what's coming next on everything else. Rules previews, of course, will come closer to their release, which is going to be mid next year. So, of course, you have some time to wait. But the speculation can, of course, commence at any point in time, and you can see how close you are to correct when those rules previews comes out. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you had fun. Hope that you are as excited as we are to have these characters come out and hit Legion tables all across the globe next year. Of course, you can tune in tomorrow, 1 p.m. Pacific. Dallas Kemp is going to be hobbying on some cool stuff. I'll be back next Tuesday for Halloween Madness. I don't really know what that means, but we're going to be doing some more fun stuff as we close out the year. I believe I'm going to have a conversion to show off next week that we're going to be painting as well. So we're just going to continue with our hobby kind of like wildness and doing as many different and varied things as possible as we just finish out the rest of 2023 and move into all the cool stuff that's coming in 2024. Till then, I've been Will. You've been great. We'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.